Alright, so I'm back with another video, and in the last video, I was saying that some of what might not translate between cultural differences, especially as expressed in differences within language. It might have to do with concept of self and other that might be a deeper reflection of duties to self and other, and therefore dynamics of power in a group, and that can be true across human groups, Europe was appreciated as European, that is patriarchal traditionally, and feudal traditionally, coming from the experiences, the economic realities of Europe within the last 2,000 years at least, would inform speech conduct within speech, no less than issues of status being very important in communication, and then like turn taking, and then maybe some of your pronunciation of consonants, having an emphasis on that, which actually the consonants, there might be something of a power dynamic within consonants, because according to Arthur Avalon, the letters of language are vastly more profound than a person could ordinarily appreciate. I think in Sanskrit you have 51 letters, and but the letters are vastly more significant than a person could normally appreciate, as are numbers vastly more appreciated or significant than most people could appreciate. And actually, what we have for numbers, like our 10-digit system based on 10, that's actually called the Hindu Arabic numeral system, according to Algebra for Pre-Dummies. And so there's actually an overlap between those. A lot of our political jurisdictions and regions they've been fought and won over sacrifice and pain and blood, but the reality of them, the meaning of them with respect to the actual people of the earth, and then the earth itself, are yet somewhat of an imposition upon the earth, and don't reflect the real experiences in migrations and contact and intermingling of human beings upon economic and social lines. But then also the history of none of that is completely none of that is defined by the actual political jurisdiction. So I would imagine in India there's an overlap between the influences of Arabic influences and the Hindu influences, and then maybe even some of like your Greco-Roman influences, where some of your pioneers in philosophy, but also mathematics, would have been like your Greco-Roman philosophers, like the school of like Plato and stuff like that, Aristotle, Socrates, and then like Athens, and then even the Library of Alexandria would be connected, and then you would have Egypt, because you can't take Africa out of this, not the least of which mathematics and philosophy. You would have Egypt, like Kush, and then you would also have the Hindu Arabic influences. All those were overlapping and intermingling in ways that I think that a mainstream rendition of history couldn't completely capture the real influences and overlapping between all that. But all of those cultures in those regions that I referenced right there have a deep, profound collaboration with our understanding of mathematics, but also language and letters, because your reading and writing was transpiring around that same time, and then how that would amount to like the printing press and so forth. And I don't mean to water down or bastardize any of that history, but all I meant to say is that at least Hindi is associated with our 10-digit numeral system based on our 10 digits, and also they have thoughts about letters equally. And so within that, according to Arthur Avalon, any sound contains all sound, because you actually can't enunciate anything overtly, explicitly, without all other potential sounds abiding within that implicitly. So any letter, the expression of any letter, actually any sound contains all sound. The most basic unit of sound, according to that standpoint, with Arthur Avalon, would be AUM, what the monks chant. But each letter of that A, U, and M have significant, profound degrees of significance, each of those letters. but so do all the letters. But equally, a vowel would be like that's like that is a vowel is it is it's a kinetic living. So in the traditions that Arthur Avalon talks about, you have a male and a female component of all things, but the female is more so the kinetic, the active, the real doer, the real cause, the real agent, and the male is more so of a static, even a useful stooge to the female. That's true in family creation and support and sustaining and rearing of families, but also even in a military endeavor, the female would be more so formidable. And if a female is involved in some type of combat or military engagement, it's much more of a daunting situation that is transpiring if a female is involved than if it had just been between male from the Indian perspective, and that the male is only a helper to the female even in war, and the female is more formidable than the male. And even in something like politics, leadership, or faith, no male from that perspective is truly in his power, in his real sway, without being attended by and connected to a female. A male wouldn't be viable independently from that standpoint, because a male simply isn't as kinetic and creative as a female from that perspective. But the vowels are more so the active kinetic component, because as he says, Arthur Avalon, there's no activity without a static support. There's nothing kinetic or dynamic or mobile without something static and stationary to support it. The greater contribution and effort would, or but then the male component would be the support, and actually the consonants of language are the sounding board and the support of the vowels. Because I think you might need a consonant in order to express a vowel. You might not be able to isolate to actually pronounce a vowel in the true sense without a consonant attending that. So they might actually be completely intermingled. But that might have something to do with the fact that Eurocentric language has more of an emphasis on consonants. That would be like, I would appreciate that from studying Arthur Avalon as being more so of a masculine contribution to language, and actually in fact weaker, but also stemming from the fact that Eurocentric language is patriarchal. Then the Afrocentric, the FBA, Foundational Black American, but also just Afrocentric language would be more so would have an emphasis on the vowels, which would be active and kinetic, but maybe feminine. And then that might reflect the fact that it's a matriarchal society, would have a bearing on that. And that's going to impact the way that the language sounds and functions and expresses. And maybe some of why a lot of music is so beautiful when it's Afrocentric or foundational Black American. Some of you imagine most people could appreciate that most of popular music derives from, borrows, or appropriates some degree of the foundational Black American experience. Most people could appreciate that. Almost any genre of music would have an effect on that. Would be attended by that. I don't know how people would express classical music, since it doesn't have rhythm, since it doesn't employ drums, and some of the classical periods of music would be very Eurocentric, ostensibly before contact with African culture, but that would yet be arbitrary according to Tashriq Bey, because you always had African influence in Europe, and Europe is actually an extension of Africa in the strictest sense, and that you always had African influence, and also people of pigmentation even in Europe. No less than the Moors in Spain, obviously, but going way deeper. There's a name for the people that were existing in Europe with darker hue. I can't think of that name off the top of my head, but there's a name for those people. So you could say that even your Eurocentric, that is classical music before or during colonialism, before as much contact or exchange with African cultures, it yet already had African influences on the Europe side. And you could even maybe say that I would imagine some of the instruments, they would be like I know your string, your guitar, maybe I think that had been an African influence, the guitar, but I would imagine that at least Kush, Egypt, would have a bearing on the expression and the conception of musical instruments. It would be hard for me to imagine Africa and Egypt not having anything to do with instruments. but I actually don't have